Hey, fifth grade, Mrs. Young here. I am here to start our algebra unit. And algebra is not scary, I promise you. It is math with letters, and those letters represent different numbers. But I promise it's not scary. Today we're going to take it nice and slow, and I'm going to just start out with two letters. So our lesson today is brought to you by X and Y. X and Y are what we call a pair. Sometimes they're called coordinate pairs or ordered pairs is what we probably will call them more often. And that pair is X and Y in parentheses. The X comes first and the Y comes second. And it does matter. A lot of kids say, does it matter if the X comes first or the Y? And it does. And I'll show you why in a little bit. So we have a pair or a point of X and Y, and those numbers represent a point on a graph or a point in some data, okay? And it could be on a table. A lot of times our points come from a table. Our X and our Y, it's kind of like a T-chart, and the X is usually what goes in. If you've heard of input or output tables, the X is what's going in. Later on, you're going to learn about rules. Okay, and so if there is a rule for a problem, the X is going to have something done to it, a rule, maybe X plus 2. And then whatever X is, you add 2 on and you get your Y. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You'll learn that later this week. Right now, I want you to understand that every pair has an X and has a Y. Okay, and then those same numbers, those X and Y's, can get graphed. And you've probably heard of an X axis and a Y axis. And I'm going to explain in just a second how you remember which one is which. Okay, let's take a look at our example here. We have a table full of X's and Y's. And so what I did is I looked at that table and I made the pairs. So if we have 0, 0 as our X and our Y, we write that as 0, 0 inside parentheses. What's unique about 0, 0 is it's called the origin. Okay, when we move over to the graph, 0, 0 is called an origin. We'll come back to that. 1, 2, 1, 2. The X is 1, the Y is 2. X, Y, X, Y, X, Y, X, Y. X first, then the Y. Okay? We can use these points to graph. Now, when we look at our graph here, we have the X on the bottom. That's the X axis. And our Y is our vertical axis. And when I taught 8th grade math, they're a little bit older, and they were starting to talk about dating, and you are too young. But I just want to explain this. Why is Mrs. Young talking about dating when we're talking about algebra? I'm only in 5th grade. I'm way too young for this, which is true. But the reason I'm telling you this is because when I was teaching algebra to my 8th graders, I had them remember this silly little saying. Okay, so maybe your older brothers or sisters are talking about dating, and maybe they broke up with somebody. Okay, and the reason I bring this up is because I tell my kids in 8th grade that when you are graphing a point, you think about your last breakup. You take your point, let's say it's 1, 2. You go over to the X, walk up, and ask them why. Here's what I mean. Start at the origin. We're going to take 1, 2. Go over on the X, walk up, and ask them why. So you're going to go over on the X, over, and then up, over 3, up, forward. Walk over, ask them why. Walk over, ask them why. So you're going over on the X, walk up on the Y. It's just a silly saying that some of my 8th graders have come back and told me years later that they have never forgotten which one is which. So walk over to your X, go up, and ask them why. Over is the X, up is the Y. X comes first in the alphabet, so we go over first. We go up second. Over, up, X, Y. Very silly, but you'll never forget. So our coordinate or ordered pairs, X, Y, they create tables, they create graphs. The X comes first. The X is on the horizontal axis. You go over first, then you go up. If we're going to graph 2, 3, we start at the origin, that 0, 0, every time. We go over 2, up 3. So over on the X, Up on the Y, where do they meet? Okay. Later in this week, you're going to be graphing. You're going to be using a table. You're going to find out more about these ordered pairs. If you have any questions, don't forget to check in between 9 and 11:30 with your teacher. Good luck. Enjoy algebra. It's not scary.